Hi, I'm Mr. Buckingham, and this video is on energy cycles. So back in 2010, 2011, I used to work for OMSI and their outdoor science camps, and one of them was in the San Juan Islands, and that was one of my favorite camps. If you've ever been to the San Juan Islands, if you haven't, you should go. It's beautiful, and there are a lot of orca populations up there. And there's one notably called the J-pod. So I captured this video when I was up there, and all these people were super excited because this is not normally captured. And it's kind of a question like, why are there so few orcas compared to like all the trees in the background? There's like thousands and thousands of trees. And we'll get through why that is, and it's mainly to do with the energy available in the ecosystem. So as a side note, this orca is Ruffles, and you can see that his dorsal fin is really wavy. He was in Free Willy. If you've watched that video from I think the 80s or early 90s, all those wild scenes in the beginning and the end are of him and of J-Pod, and his mother was Granny, and Granny lived for like 105 years old. She supposedly died in December 2016, which is super sad, very recent. So I'm going to be talking about energy and how it moves through a food chain. So a food chain, just animals eating other animals, or not just animals, plants too, and how multiple food chains can be in a food web. If that food web will have a keystone species, and what happens if that keystone species is taken out. And then the energy side, so different trophic levels, and how energy moves through successive trophic levels. And part of those are producers, and then consumers will eat producers, and consumers will also eat other consumers. And how do we recycle matter? Well, it's detrivores and decomposers. And all of that has to do with energy and matter, and energy and matter are different things when we talk about energy cycles. So in our orca example, or a marine food chain, so a food chain would be where the bottom would be producers, usually. So producers are going to be able to produce their own food. So phytoplankton in this example, the phyto part meaning that there are photosynthetic pigments in the organism so that it can convert sunlight energy into more chemical energy. So as we go up the food chain, so this zooplankton is going to eat the phytoplankton, the primary producer. And if it eats something, so if it's a heterotroph, it will need to get its energy from something else, or it'll have to consume its energy from something else. So that's going to be the primary producer. The primary producers are also called autotrophs. So they are able to make their own food. And that's what auto means, self. So primary consumers will be eaten then by carnivores, and there are multiple different carnivores. So going up the food chain, they're usually larger animals and fewer number in the population until we get all the way to the quaternary consumer. So if one carnivore or one consumer is lower than the other, that means it's going to be eaten by the other. So if we put a food chain, multiple food chains together into a food web, it's a little bit more intricate of a process. And if an arrow is pointing towards an organism, that means that the organism is consuming the other. So that means if this blue whale is here and the arrow is pointing towards the blue whale, that means the blue whale is consuming the krill and the energy is going towards the blue whale. So in this example, the killer whale on the top, there are many things that the killer whale can eat. And it looks like this Weddell seal in the middle is eating and being eaten by a bunch of animals as well. And this is pretty delicate. If we remove some animals in here, or if some populations are affected by it, if they grow or if they get smaller, then other parts of the food web will also be affected. So a keystone species is one where it's vital in its ecosystem. So if we were to remove it, again, that means that other parts would collapse in the ecosystem. So sea otters are a great example. So centuries ago, we would trap all of these sea otters and kill them. And so the sea otters along our coast were no longer there. And what happened was the sea urchin population went crazy, and they just littered the bottom of the ocean. And what they do is that they will eat the bottom of kelp. So there's a lot of sea urchins will go for the bottom of the kelp, and that kelp will then just float away and it will eventually die. And so all of these kelp, and they're known as kelp forests, which we're known for on our coasts, were starting to plummet. The numbers were starting to plummet. And so what happened was all of these organisms were affected by that. So crabs weren't able to hide in the kelp. Fish weren't able to hide and get protection from these forests. And other microinvertebrates or other small organisms were not able to have a certain habitat to survive. So, and all of that happened, this entire ecosystem started to collapse because the sea otters were taken away. So a keystone species is really important in the ecosystem. So the wolf example in Yellowstone, when we removed the wolf, the entire ecosystem collapsed. So a wolf is also a keystone species. So we have a little picture here of what happens with sea otters, and you can see this is a pretty healthy forest of kelp, and then without, and so not much life will exist without the sea otters. All right, so we're going to talk about energy. Energy originates from the sun, and all of these producers will be able to photosynthesize. Oops. That's supposed to be an N. So they're able to produce their own food, and the primary consumers, so the first consumer level, so the heterotrophs, are able to get about 10% of the energy, let's put that as an E, 10% of the energy from the producers. So, and that's not a lot. And as we go up again, it will be only 10% from the primary consumers will be gained from the secondary consumers only can grab 10% from the primary consumers. So again, that's only 10%, so the number starts to go down. And that is because energy is lost through heat. So 90% about is lost through heat. And so as we go up, it's another 10% is gained, and another 10% of that is gained. So if we started with, let's say, 1,000 joules of energy at the bottom that the producers are able to glean from the sun. So if that's true, and we're going up one level to the primary consumers, then they are only going to get 100 joules of energy, because a lot is lost through cell respiration and different processes from the plants. And as we go up again, we multiply by 0.1, which is going to be 10%, and we're going to get only 10 joules. And then if we want to go up again, multiply by 0.1, and that's going to be 1 joule. And we multiply again, by 0.1, and we're only going to get 0.1 joules of energy. Okay, and that is a tiny amount for the ecosystem for these quaternary consumers. So that means that there's going to be less number in the population of those higher consumers. And that is going to be our orca example. So orcas, they only have a few members in their population because there's not a lot of energy left over for them in their ecosystem. And we can use a different graph to see that. So if this is an energy graph, there's a lot in primary producers, but as we go up to each level, each trophic level, it gets smaller and smaller. So the tertiary consumers in this one only have like this tiny amount left of the energy for them. All right, and so decomposers and detrivores, these are important in order to cycle some of the matter. So a decomposer will break down dead material. So you can see this fungus and bacteria. This fungus will break down leaves and other dead material in order to recycle some of that matter for other organisms. A detrivore instead will consume energy, or will consume, the dead material. So these worms will consume some of the dead leaf material or whatever's in the soil, and they'll use that for energy. And this is a sea cucumber, and sea cucumbers they're like the little vacuums of the ocean floor, and they'll be able to consume a lot of the sand and debris, and then their poop is like this beautiful sand silt left over. So again, a different graph for this. As we go up the different trophic levels, so trophic level 1, 2, 3, and 4, which is also going to be producer, primary consumer, secondary, and tertiary consumer. All of this energy is going to, the energy will go up, okay, but it will not recycle. What does recycle is the matter, and that's going to be recycled by the decomposers, which are going to be the fungi and bacteria. And all of the energy is going to be lost mainly through heat, a large portion of it. And that's it. Goodbye.